What if the part of your child that frustrates you most is the part of yourself that was never accepted? The silence that feels too cold, the energy that feels too loud, the way they vanish into books or bounce like sparks from wall to wall. What if it's not just about them? What if the way you react is the echo of a voice you grew up hearing? Why are you so quiet? Why do you always need attention? Why can't you just be normal? And so now as a parent, you try to shape them, smooth the edges, round them out. You call it guidance, maturity, molding them for the world. But maybe, without knowing it, you're asking your child to become the version of you that survived. This is not a video about parenting strategies. This is about a shift in the way you see. We throw around the question like a label, is my child an introvert or an extrovert? But that question doesn't just come from curiosity. It often comes from fear. The fear of raising a child who doesn't fit in. The fear of watching them retreat when others run forward. The fear of their brightness drawing judgment. Or their quiet drawing concern. So we search for boxes, we reach for checklists. We ask Google what's normal. But what if there was a deeper lens, older than any parenting manual? Before there were types or charts or labels, there was Carl Jung, a man who spent his life exploring the soul, not as a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be honored. He gave us the words introvert and extrovert, but those were never meant to be cages, they were mirrors. Introversion and extroversion, to Jung, were not about personality, they were about orientation, where the energy flows, where the fire refuels. He saw the child not as a product of parenting, but as an unfolding of inner direction. And if you miss that direction, if you rush to shape instead of listen, you may never see who your child was always trying to become. So before we define them, before we fix or fear or even admire too quickly, let's take a breath, step back, and ask the question underneath the question, not what is my child, but can I see them without needing them to be me? Because sometimes the most important thing a child needs is not a better path, but a parent who sees the one they're already on. Imagine two children entering the same room. One bursts in like spring wind, chatting, laughing, touching everything, already leading a game no one explained. Their joy expands outward, feeding off every spark of interaction. The other pauses at the door. Their eyes scan the room slowly. They walk toward the corner, open a book, and begin to read. Not because they're nervous, but because they're listening. Not with their ears, but with their whole being. Which one is thriving? That's the wrong question. Because Carl Jung would tell you they're not opposites. They're just walking in different directions. He didn't define introverts and extroverts by behavior. He defined them by the current of their energy. One turns inward to make sense of the world. The other turns outward to experience it. And that changes everything. Because when a child withdraws after a play date, it may not mean they're lonely. It may mean they're full, overflowing, and they need quiet to return to themselves. When a child talks non-stop at the dinner table, it may not be attention-seeking. It may be how they digest the world, aloud through connection. And we keep asking, why is my child like this? Jung would ask, where does their energy return to rest? He once told the story of a boy who didn't walk until he had named every object in the room. That child wasn't behind, he was absorbing, he was preparing. He wasn't moving on the outside, but his mind was walking miles. But we miss this in modern parenting. We confuse stimulation with progress. We think fast is good and quiet is a warning. And in doing so, we risk calling wisdom a delay. We mistake inner richness for withdrawal. We call attunement to one's own rhythm a problem. But it's not, because some children are like wells. Deep, still, and clear only when left undisturbed. Others are like rivers, loud, bright, alive in motion. One is not more valuable than the other. They are just built for different paths. And if you try to make a well flow like a river, you dry it up. If you ask a river to be still, you kill its momentum. So the task isn't to decide what your child is and mold them to match. The task is to understand the orientation of their soul and adjust the world accordingly. This isn't about labeling your child as one thing. It's about listening long enough to realize they might be something you've never seen before. Because if you can do that, if you can pause long enough to hear what their silence means or follow what their energy seeks, then the question changes. Not is my child an introvert or an extrovert? But what kind of world do I need to create so that they don't have to change who they are just to survive it? That's the kind of question that opens everything. And that's where we go next. There are two children in the same classroom. One walks in like a spark, words flying faster than thoughts, ideas spilling out like paint. They lead the game before the rules are written. Laughter follows them like gravity. They are bold, visible, alive in the noise. The other child. They enter quietly, they glance at the walls. They sit at the edge of the group. Their silence is not fear, it's depth. They listen, they study, they see everything. One is praised, the other is assessed. Because we live in a world that mistakes visibility for value. The louder child is called brave, the quieter child is called shy. But that isn't insight, it's oversight. One child digests the world through interaction, the other through observation, and neither is broken. Carl Jung taught that the soul orients in different directions, some outward toward engagement, others inward toward meaning. But when the outward-facing child is celebrated and the inward-facing one is worked on, something sacred is lost. There's a parable you may have heard about a family who complains their home is too cramped and chaotic. The wise elder tells them to bring all their animals inside, the chickens, the goat, the cow. Days later, suffocating in the noise and mess, they're told to let the animals out again. And suddenly the house feels peaceful, spacious, alive with quiet. What changed wasn't the space, it was the perception of stillness. They finally learned what quiet means. Some children live like that home, with too many demands crammed into their emotional space. Every time we try to fix a child who thrives in solitude, we're crowding their inner sanctuary with goats that don't belong. But they don't need fixing. They need space to breathe and silence to bloom. There's another story, a fable from Italo Calvino, The King Listens. A ruler obsessed with his own voice believes he is wise. But one day he removes the noise of court and hears something he never expected, the sound of others. In silence he discovers the world outside himself and he weeps. There are children like that too, not kings, but deep feelers. Children whose value isn't in how much they say, but how much they sense. Susan Cain once wrote, "There's zero correlation between being the best talker and having the best ideas." Yet how often do we reward the talkers while overlooking the quiet minds already shaping the world we can't yet see? Some of the deepest rivers make the least noise. Some of the strongest trees bend inward before reaching for the sun. We don't see the roots, but they're what holds the forest together. So if your child is the kind who reads during recess or watches clouds while others chase balls, don't interrupt their silence. Don't confuse their reflection with absence. They are not behind, they are becoming. And if we stop trying to drag them into the spotlight, we might discover the brilliance they've been hiding there all along. We love to name things. It makes the unknown feel smaller. Introvert, extrovert, shy, confident, wild, withdrawn. We sign these words with the casual power of a God naming creation. And the child unaware carries them like prophecy. But children are not labels, they are mirrors reflecting both their truth and your unfinished story. Carl Jung warned us. He said the greatest burden a child carries is the unlived life of the parent. And that's what a label can become, a disguise for projection, a quiet rewrite of our own unresolved fears. We call our child shy because we remember being silenced. We call them too much because we were punished for being loud. But the problem isn't the child, it's the ghost of our own upbringing whispering, "Not again." So we start adjusting them, refining them, correcting what we think might echo the parts of ourselves we had to hide to survive. But what if the child who overwhelms you is the part of you that was never allowed to be wild? And what if the child who retreats from noise is the part of you that still longs for peace? The extroverted child triggers your fear of being invisible. The introverted child triggers your fear of being too much. This is the point where parenting becomes not an act of teaching, but an act of healing. Because every time we push our child to change their nature, we're often trying to rewrite the part of ourselves that still aches. That's why labels are dangerous. Not because they're false, but because they're incomplete. Your child is not an introvert. They are a soul who turns inward to refuel. They're not an extrovert. They are a spirit that thrives through connection. They are not too quiet. They are listening to a world we stopped noticing. They are not too much. They are the thunder we learn to fear. And here's the truth no one says aloud. The child you're struggling to parent might be the very one who came to save you. Not by fixing your past, but by refusing to carry its silence forward. So stop asking if your child is introverted or extroverted. Ask what their energy is trying to become. Ask what part of your story is being rewritten through them. Ask what version of love they need that you never received. Then sit with that answer. Let it hurt a little. Because healing often sounds like mourning. And parenting at its highest form is not control, it is recognition. Your child is not a project, they are a revelation. And they don't need to be turned into someone impressive. They need to be protected while they become someone true. Because if you can hold space for that, the label dissolves, the fear fades. And all that's left is a human soul finally allowed to unfold. Parenting lives in paradox. You want your child to belong, but you also want them to stand out. You want them to feel safe, but you don't want them to play small. You want to protect their spirit, but you also want them to be strong enough to survive the world. So you hover, you soften, you sharpen, you try, and some days it feels like you're doing all of it wrong. But maybe that's not failure. Maybe that's the sign that you're awake. Because your child is not one thing. They are a spectrum, a storm, a garden. Carl Jung believed that every soul is shaped by the tension of opposites. We grow not by eliminating the contradiction, but by learning how to hold it. And this is where our children teach us. The introverted child who avoids the crowd may be the one who grows up to lead it, because they understand what it means to feel invisible. The extroverted child who interrupts may be the one who protects others, because they were never afraid to speak. The child who cries easily today may become the adult who notices suffering before anyone else does. But only if we don't shame the very thing they'll one day be grateful for. And that's the hard part, because you can't always see what they're becoming. You can only choose to honor who they are right now. Some children gather energy from silence, others from interaction. Some need stillness to grow. Others need movement to thrive, and sometimes they shift, sometimes they surprise you, because they're not fixed, they're alive. We tend to think of parenting as shaping, molding, guiding. But what if it's more like guarding the flame, not deciding its shape, but protecting its right to burn the way it was born to? Because here's the paradox you must carry. The very thing that makes your child too much today might be the thing that saves their life tomorrow. That's not a flaw, that's a signal. The world will ask your child to become acceptable. Your job is to remind them they're already enough. You're not raising a personality. You are raising a soul. And when you begin to see them that way, the paradox stops being a problem. It becomes the path. Carl Jung once said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent." But what if the greatest gift they could receive is your permission to live differently? This isn't just about whether your child is introverted or extroverted. It's about whether you can let go of who you expected them to be so they can become who they already are. Parenting is not performance, it's presence. It's the choice to witness your child's becoming, even when it doesn't look like your own. Even when it stirs the shadows of who you weren't allowed to be. Because when your child speaks too loudly, moves too quickly, or retreats too often, they're not misbehaving. They're revealing the rhythm of their energy. Jung taught us that energy isn't about preference, it's about orientation. Some souls turn inward, some outward, some alternate like tides. So don't rush to fix what doesn't feel familiar. Get curious. If they're quiet, ask what fills them. If they're loud, ask what moves them. If they're distant, ask what calms them. If they're intense, ask what ignites them. Because your child is not here to repeat your story. They are here to heal it. Not by obeying your lessons, but by becoming the parts of you that were never allowed to exist. And that healing, it doesn't look like perfection. It looks like listening longer than you used to be listened to. It looks like pausing before you label. It looks like letting them be who they are, even when you don't understand it. Because when you do that, you don't just raise a child, you raise a lineage, you raise a revolution. And years from now, when they look back, not at your rules, but at your presence, they'll remember this. They were allowed to be quiet, to be wild, to be seen, to be loved. Before they knew who they were, you stayed. And that's the kind of parenting the world is starving for. So if this made you remember a version of yourself who wasn't allowed to unfold or see your child with clearer eyes, share it. Because there's another parent out there right now trying to label the very thing their child needs protected. Trying to fix a rhythm that was never broken. You never know who needs to hear. You don't have to shape them. You just have to see them. If you felt that, leave a comment. Let someone else feel less alone. And if you want to keep remembering what matters most, subscribe. Because this work doesn't end here, it begins here. Every time you choose softness over fear, listening over labeling, presence over performance, that's how we change the world. One child, seen, heard, and finally allowed to be